they're turning, and it's moving the X and then the Y's, and it's tracing around that pattern. And that's exactly what we want it to do. What I've got here is all my stepper motors. I went ahead and hooked them up, and I decided not to use my shielded cable. I just wanted to get it all up and running. I would recommend that you go ahead and do that. I originally in the last video said wait on that. It will require you to eventually unhook just the 4 wires of each stepper motor, and we'll splice in 4 wires from our shielded cable. We'll extend it to whatever length we need, and we'll put connectors, but this will make sure that all the other connections are correct. And I want to talk a little bit about labeling. I mentioned to put masking tape or blue painter's tape. I think I came up with a better solution, and I think this is going to save you a lot of headaches. I took every single stepper motor, I labeled the axes. So when I did it, I labeled it on one side and the other like so. That way, if it's mounted into the machine, if one side's covered, the other side should be facing it. So label it. I just printed a large font in bold, taped it on to my stepper motor. I think that's going to help you a lot as you try to trace down and orient these things on your machine. The next thing is I labeled every one of my stepper drivers. I labeled in that same black color with white, and then I just took Scotch tape and taped it down. And I put it so that when I mount these stepper motors straight down like this, that the letter is easy to see, because that's likely the way it's oriented. And then I also labeled all the stuff that was in the video. In fact, I did a screen clip, grabbed that and I shrunk it down so that I could fit it on here, and then I just taped it onto my motor, and I actually taped it on the back side so I can see it from either side. That way, if any of these wires come loose, then I have a way to trace it down. Then I went even crazier, and I think maybe this is the most useful labeling of all, and that is I labeled the little plugs. I labeled X to correspond to the axis, and also this plug X. And that means when I mount all these things, I can yank out these plugs, I can get my screws oriented, I can get it nice and clean when I mount it, and then I can just go and plug the thing in, because these only go in one direction. And if I label every single one of mine, the Y's of course have 2 of them, so when I labeled these plugs here, I labeled them Y1 and Y1. That is a really good scenario. This blue painter's tape I put on there only because it just becomes spaghetti. It's not going to be nearly this bad once you have your shielded cable, because your shielded cable is already encased, and you'll only have the part out that's just going to be the connector here, and then you're going to run it to wherever. This is just a temporary fix, but this is what I really wanted to show you. If you go ahead and hook up all of the things just like we did in the last 2 videos and get it ready to run, let's just go through the process. You've got your USB cable hooked up, you've got your power supply on, you came into GSENDER, and okay, it's unconnected. I'm going to go connect to machine, just like we did before. Come over here, you can jog your axes, and you can see I've got painter's tape on each of these stepper motors. There's my X that we did the other day. Here's my Y. And when I turn my Y, note how both stepper motors go. That's because we have them both hooked into that pin 3 and pin 6. They'll move simultaneously, which is exactly what we want, and we want them to go in the same direction. So it just proves that everything's working. But I've got something better for you. We can still run Gcode on this, and there's a sneaky way to get Gcode without having to give you a huge lesson on CAD, and that is to use a program inside this GSENDER called surfacing, which allows you to surface your spoil board. And what you want to do is you want to go over to dimensions and use these dimensions. Set the length to 50, the width to 60. None of these really pertain to us, but then down here at the bottom, there's 2 different buttons. Click the one on the left, the one that looks like it's spiraling in. And then we're going to go down here and left click on Generate Gcode. It'll take a second when you do that. And it will come over here and it will basically create a geometric code that is computer code that gets sent out in a series of commands to your Arduino. And we can go ahead and we can run this on the main screen. So we're going to click on Run on Main Visualizer. Now what this really does is it just brings the code over into this We didn't have to have a USB stick in it with the code on like we typically would. And we didn't have to save it on our computer. It's just internal inside this program, which is kind of nice. Now, it's not actually doing anything. You go, it didn't work. Well, even though it said run on the main visualizer, what it really means is bring this code over on this screen, but you still have to run it like you would just any other G-code. So any other G-code, I would be loading it in here, it would show up on here, and then I would have to hit the start job. So I'm gonna hit the start job, and what I want you to focus on is what goes on with these motors. Change the orientation down here. So I'll zoom out a little bit. Watch this little dot go around. That's going to correspond to movements. Sometimes on my Raspberry Pi, it does lag a little bit on the screen, but it doesn't seem to affect any of the stepper motors. So sometimes it takes a while for the screen to catch up, but I'm going to go ahead and hit start job, and that's what you'll do. Hit start job. And immediately what you see, if you look at those stepper motors, is they're turning, and it's moving the X and then the Y's, and it's tracing around that pattern. And that's exactly what we want it to do. You can just kind of follow along and see that when it gets to different parts of the code, like the Y's go a different direction if they're going down than if they go up, and then even the Z shifts a little bit there at the end. So you've just tested your CNC, you got it running, you got all your steppers. I know this was a super short one. You go, it's about time we had a super short one, and I hope that was helpful to you.